Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight we're going to be talking about some people that have simply gone vanished for no apparent reason, mysteries from the past, and some from the not too far past. First of all, mark your calendars for July 29th, 2018. World-famous wrestler Ricardo Rodriguez will be sparring with Thunder Rosa at 1303 Iturbide here in Laredo, Texas, at the Dugout. Doors open at 6 p.m., and it's only $5 to get in. Kids 7 and under get in for free. That's July 29th, only here in Laredo. Each year, about 600,000 people go missing, and that's just in the United States. Most of these folks turn up eventually. They either left without telling anyone, or they decided they just wanted to get away from everything and everyone that they thought were their problems. Most of these people didn't realize they were their own problems and not those they were trying to escape from. But in December 1999, 2 young girls were spending the night together. Lauria was over visiting Ashley. There was nothing to indicate anything strange was going on, just 2 friends spending the night together. They were both 16, and their parents knew each other. Late in the night, a fire broke out, and the trailer home was completely engulfed before the fire department could arrive. The initial rescue turned into recovery as the firefighters began sifting the debris looking for bodies. They found the body of Kathy Freeman, the mother of Ashley. They also found there was a bullet wound to her head, which indicated this had been a murder. The first suspect was her husband, Danny. The authorities suspected there might have been some kind of a domestic dispute, and the husband had killed his wife and then took the 2 teens away after setting fire to the house. Just as the search was being initiated for the 3 bodies, the husband was discovered also with a bullet hole to his head. Now the suspects became the 2 young girls. The authorities thought perhaps they had killed the 2 adults and left town. There was no evidence either Ashley nor Lauria had killed the husband and wife. No one had ever seen or heard any arguments or disputes among the family members. After an exhaustive search, the authorities had to focus on other crimes, and the case was shelved until new evidence could be uncovered. Lorena Bible, the mother of Lauria, kept looking. She posted on Facebook and asked if anyone knew her whereabouts. Lauria Bible and her friend Ashley Freeman, both 16, disappeared December 1999. Jeremy Jones claimed he had killed the 2 girls and hid their bodies. He was unable to tell anyone where he'd hidden them, and since he was already on death row awaiting execution, his story was not taken very seriously. Some people have reported seeing the 2 girls at a convenience store or fast food restaurants, but every time the police look into these leads, they never find any clues. Lorraine received a tip from social media saying the bodies were in the bottom of a well. The police went to the location of the report and searched the well, but they found no bodies or any evidence there had ever been anyone dropped into the well. It's hard to imagine going through the past 19 years not knowing if Lauria and her friend Ashley are still alive, or if so, where they might be. This is one of those cases where the family is left in limbo, waiting to see if they should move on or try to keep looking. Brianna Matland was born on October 8th, 1986. She lived at home with her parents in Montgomery, Vermont, until she turned 17. There were no problems at home. She just wanted to try living on her own. She moved from the family farm into town, where she got a job working at the Black Lantern Inn. On March 19, 2004, Brianna met her mother, Kelly, for lunch to celebrate having completed her GED. They had lunch and then spent the day shopping. While in line to pay, Brianna saw something outside the store and suddenly left. When she returned, she acted a bit unusual, but she claimed it was nothing. That Saturday, a state patrol unit was dispatched to check on a car that was parked at an abandoned house on Route 118 in Richford. It turned out the car was partially in the old Dutch burn house. The car was backed into the siding and the rear was smashed by the siding. The trooper checked the car and found 2 uncashed checks for Brianna's work. Thinking the driver was perhaps drunk and left the car after the accident, the car was towed into town. The registration came back to Brianna's mother, but due to some issue, no one called Mrs. Matland for 5 days. Kelly had become worried when Brianna hadn't called after the first day, and she started calling all of her friends, trying to track down her missing daughter. Mr. and Mrs. Matland filed a missing persons report with the state police. As the authorities began looking into Brianna's disappearance, they discovered the crashed car had been driven by the missing teen. A description of Brianna was sent out to all the surrounding agencies. They began checking with friends and acquaintances, trying to track her down. In the days and weeks following her disappearance, numerous tips were investigated by state law enforcement, including a claim that Matland was being held captive in the house occupied by a local drug dealer. However, none of these tips resulted in her being discovered. A 2006 sighting of Matland at a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, brought renewed interest to the case, but the woman seen was never properly identified. In 2012, law enforcement investigated a possible connection between Matland's disappearance and a serial killer, Israel Kayes, who had committed numerous rapes and murders in Vermont, New York, and throughout the Pacific Northwest. But he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. To this day, Brianna is still missing, and no one has the slightest idea where she may be. A 50-year-old A.J. Briot was a clothing salesman and a recovering alcoholic. He had joined AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and he had stayed with the program for 8 years. He was also a member of the Easy Does It Club, which is a kind of an offshoot of AA. On August 28, 1991, he left the club at around 8:30 p.m. About a half hour later, he bought milk at a local convenience store. This was the last time he was ever seen. His car was found abandoned 2 days later in a park across the street from the club. His wallet and checkbook were both inside. There was no sign of any kind of a foul play. Shortly after his disappearance, witnesses came forward claiming to have seen A.J. One witness, an acquaintance named Kenneth, claimed that he saw him on August 30th outside of a convenience store on a payphone. He said the man was wearing a plaid shirt, and he appeared somewhat disheveled, as if he'd been having trouble. There was a red compact car parked in front of him, with 3 men sitting in it. The 3 men looked like they were all watching A.J. After a few minutes, the men left. Another witness who knew A.J. also claimed to have seen him with 3 men in a compact car about 8 miles out of town. The witness waved to him, but A.J. did not wave back. This was uncharacteristic for him. Neither of the witnesses knew that he was missing at that time. 2 weeks after he vanished, a note was sent to the police that claimed he had accidentally shot himself while drinking and that his body had been tossed into a lake. The lake mentioned in the note was searched, but no trace of him was ever found. On September 28th, a woman named Christy Boudreau, who lived 30 miles from Huma, claimed that a man matching A.J.'s description visited her on the front porch, trying to sell her frozen fish. She said that he appeared disheveled and his breath smelled of alcohol. She later identified A.J. as the man who had approached her on the porch. Authorities believe that he may have relapsed and began drinking again, although his family is convinced that he was abducted. A 4th witness later came forward claiming to have seen 3 men force a 4th one into a car and drive away. The witness could not positively identify the man as A.J. However, the case remains unsolved. So what happened to A.J.? It could be he simply decided to start drinking again. Lord knows, few alcoholics ever survive as long as he had. Could there have been something from his past that finally caught up with him? In AA, it is one of the steps to make amends to those who have been harmed in the past, unless it will do further damage. On occasion, while deep in the arms of alcohol, people are known to do some stupid and uncaring things. Had A.J. began drinking, why did he leave his car at the club? A practicing alcoholic would not hesitate to jump in his car and drive no matter how wasted he might be. And why was his wallet still there? If A.J. were going on a bender, he'd need money to support his demons. A.J. was declared legally dead in 1998. There has never been a body found, and his family have no idea where he might be. Today, the family hold a memorial on A.J.'s birthday in the park where his car was found. They are still hoping and praying A.J. will turn up. He would be 77 years old today. As I went about my day-to-day work as a Border Patrol agent, we would encounter all kinds of folks from all walks of life. There were the people who snuck into our country, and they're the ones born here but living in some other world, one of their own imagination. I landed a position on the bike patrol and found out when you're riding around town on a bike, you become a magnet for those with odd behavior. Jarvis Plaza is the epicenter for folks with difficulties upstairs. I wound up talking to a few of these people, which led to my wondering, is there a family out there somewhere looking for these people? Laredo has more than their share of street folks, homeless, unwanted, unknowns. I asked several about why they had come to Laredo, and I was shocked by the answer. Those that had enough grasp on reality to remember said they'd been living in San Antonio. They'd gotten off the bus and simply decided to stay. Eventually, they were picked up by the San Antonio police, taken to the bus station, and sent south. At first, I thought this was just a story until I asked an officer from San Antonio. He said, yes, it was their unofficial policy to send vagrants south to us. Gee, thanks. We had a college professor that one day his elevator got stuck in the basement. He was okay to talk to, but he did have some trouble with the here and now. There was a school teacher who'd had one too many weird students, and it tipped her over the edge, as she was living in a tent on the river. Then there was Daniel. He was all kinds of off in the head. He would stand in the middle of the street acting like he was dancing like Elvis. So we began to call him Elvis. He was way out there in the mental health department. He would take black shoe polish and smear it through his hair to cover up the gray. As a result, he had kind of an explosive-looking hairdo. One day I saw him laying on the side of I-35. It looked like he was just sleeping in the grassy area. Then I found out he'd stepped in front of a truck, thinking it would stop or swerve. It did neither. He was DRT. Dead right there. I got to wondering who he really was. Did he have people back home, wherever that was, that were still looking for him? Could AJ be standing on a street corner right now with a cardboard sign asking for a few bucks to buy his next drink? Or did something far weirder happen to AJ? Here, at our house, there was a guy named Randy who was down from Maine. I never did get his last name. I asked, but he always dodged the question. Randy was a short, portly fellow who could barely walk. He had to use a walker. He told me he didn't drink or do drugs. He was saving up to open a soup kitchen. Randy was one of the few beggars I would give money to. He was always smiling, and he would wave whether you gave him money or not. He managed to save up enough money to buy a small SUV, which he began living in when he wasn't working the corner at Hillside in San Dario. I would ride over on my bike and chat with him on occasion. One day, he wasn't at his corner. I drive by that corner 10 times a day. I still wonder, where did he go? There's no police report on him that I could find. He either moved on or simply vanished. And if he vanished, then would he be one of those missing people that nobody ever finds? I really hope not. January 16th, 1995, in Garden City, Kansas, Rachel Pratt, a 15-year-old, was at home watching TV with her brother. The brother fell asleep and was awakened around 2 in the morning when his mother, Jan, returned home from work. Jan asked the brother where Rachel was. Well, he didn't know because he'd fallen asleep. Jan looked all over the house. When her daughter didn't turn up, Jan called the police to report her as missing. The only thing Rachel had taken with her was her jacket. The police waited 5 days before they started by contacting any friends or neighbors to see if the missing teen might be there. They figured she had just wandered off one time. They then checked the bus station, hospital, and of course, the morgue. Robert Platt was living in Illinois at the time, and the police checked to see if Rachel had run away to be with him, her father. Robert had no idea as to where his daughter might be. It turned out Rachel was about 2 months pregnant. The police went and talked to the father of her soon-to-be child, and he turned out to be an adult and was promptly arrested for having sex with a minor. The boyfriend was held until it was determined he didn't know where Rachel was, and there was really no proof that he had taken advantage of the minor since the soon-to-be mother was missing. Some friends of Rachel later said they saw her at a grocery store. Rachel had asked for a ride, but the friends were unable to help. They didn't know at that time that Rachel was officially missing. Jan is still angry with the Garden City police, believing that they started investigating sooner. Perhaps they would have found the missing teen. Had Rachel been planning to run away from home, why didn't she take anything other than her jacket? None of her friends knew she was going, and they all say they don't know where she went. The boyfriend sounded like a good suspect until a thorough check on him found he did not know where Rachel was. It's as if Rachel walked out the door and stepped into a different dimension. On the morning of December 23rd, 1974, 3 girls were going to go shopping at the Seminary South Shopping Center in Fort Worth, Texas. 2 of these girls had been friends for years, and the third was a neighbor who asked to tag along at the last minute. They told their families they would be home around 4 that afternoon. Rachel, not the one from the original story, Rachel Trilica, was 17 and married at the time. She picked up her friend Renee Wilson, who was 14, and the two were about to set out when Julianne Mosley, a 9-year-old who lived nearby, asked if she could go with them. She was tired of hanging around the house. Julie knew the other 2 girls from being babysat from time to time. The 2 teens said yes as long as Julie's mother gave her permission. Then the 3 set out for the shopping center. They left their homes just before noon. They stopped off at an Army-Navy store to pick up some gifts on layaway, and then they traveled to the Seminary South Shopping Center. Today it's known as the Fort Worth Town Center. Rachel parked the Olds 98 on the upper level near the Sears store, and then the 3 went inside. When 4 o'clock came and went, the families began to get worried. The teens were considered to be reliable, so the families waited a bit more. When they couldn't stand it anymore, the police were called. The police started off saying it looked like the 3 girls had run off on their own for some unknown reason. Well, this made the families mad. They argued that their kids were well behaved, and the idea they had run away was beyond reasonable. The next morning, a letter was found addressed to Rachel's husband, but the name on the envelope said Thomas A. Trilica, and not Tommy the way she always called him. The name Rachel was scrawled in the upper left-hand corner of the envelope. The postmark was unlegible. There was no city name, and the numbers were blurry. The last 2 numbers were either a 38 or an 88. If the zip code was 76088, it would have come from Weatherford, Texas, the home of Expanded Perspectives. If the zip code was 76038, the letter would have come from Throckmorton, Texas, which is a bit further west from Fort Worth. The letter was a single sheet of paper, which was wider than the envelope, so it had to be folded along one edge. The writing looked more childish scrawl than something by a young teenage woman. The letter said, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in the Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel." The I on Rachel's name had been a short loop that looked more like an E. The writer had gone back over it, making it into a taller loop. It looked as if the signature had been traced instead of written. Rachel's mother, Fran Longston, never believed the letter had come from her daughter. Rachel's husband, Tommy Trillica, said, "I never thought it came from Rachel." Handwriting experts are uncertain about who wrote the letter. Their tests were inconclusive. As shoppers and clerks were questioned, some said they'd seen the three girls walking around the stores, but nothing had looked amiss. The police began calling around to the girls' friends' homes, and the families began walking the neighborhood looking for any signs of the three. They looked in ditches and fields. Every culvert was inspected. The family did their best to cooperate with each other, but the seed of suspicion began to grow as each family began to think it was the other girl who had caused these disappearances. Rayanne Mosley, the mother of the youngest girl, kept saying somebody out there somewhere knew something. Somebody knows what happened to her daughter. Soon, psychics and hoaxers began to show up. People would call saying they knew something about the missing girl's whereabouts, and they would be able to help for a small fee. A few private investigators were brought in to beef up the police investigation. As more people were questioned, some began to remember things that may or may not have happened. One man said he thought he saw the three girls being pushed into the back of a van. The man doing the pushing yelled that it was a family matter and mind his own business. A second witness said he'd seen the girls being pushed into the back of a pickup truck. The police tried to look into both of these stories but could not track down the people who'd claimed to know what had happened. It sounded as if somebody told somebody who told someone else they thought they'd seen something. As days stretched into weeks, the families began to lose hope. Weeks led to months, and then years. Still, no clue as to what had happened to the three girls. As time went by, the story lost its appeal. Folks like nice, happy endings, not a protracted mystery. As the public lost interest, the families began to lose hope. Each possible answer only made the not knowing hurt that much worse. By the next year, spring of 1975, the families were getting frustrated by the police investigation, so they hired a private investigator named John Swaim. Swaim was known as being a showman and quite fond of himself. He called press conferences, and he coerced the police into allowing him to examine case files, even though it was an ongoing case. Swaim made some headlines. Swaim said he'd received an anonymous tip that the girls' remains could be found near Port Lavaca, Texas, 320 miles south from Fort Worth. Hundreds of volunteers searched the overgrowth, the swampy bayou area. Police had searched there earlier, but with only a handful of people. Throughout the year, Swaim kept the spotlight on the case as well as himself. Some unidentified man is supposed to have called, trying to collect the reward the family had offered in exchange for information about the girls' whereabouts. The search of the swampy bayou area turned up nothing. Swaim died in 1979 of what is said to be a drug overdose. The death was ruled a suicide. All of his files, including records of this case, were destroyed. Now that sounds just about as daft as can be. If this was an ongoing case, then his records and files should have been preserved as pertinent to the case. Deborah remembered that over the months and even years following the disappearance, the psychics wrote troubling letters saying the girls' bodies had been dumped here, there, and everywhere. The families followed every lead. Searchers combed through the Texas brush and explored hundreds of back roads. 1975, the skeletal remains of a girl and a woman were found near San Antonio. For a time, the families thought the wait was over, but those bones had nothing to do with this case. Then, March 1976, a psychic called Fort Worth police from Hawaii to say that the girls' bodies could be found near an oil well. For some reason, searchers focused on the area around Rising Star, a small community near Abilene, but nothing was found except oil wells. Saying the bodies were near an oil well in Texas is like saying they're near a house in downtown Houston. Texas is covered with oil wells. That same year, an oil company employee discovered human bones in a boggy area near Houston. The swampy landscape was dotted with old derricks. This discovery didn't seem to be going anywhere until the spring of 1981, when more bones were discovered in the same swampy area. A massive search was launched, thinking they had finally found the 3 missing girls. The skeletal remains of 3 girls were actually found, but they turned out to be 3 different girls. Rachel's mother, Fran Longston, posted every newspaper article in a scrapbook. Her son and daughter read and reread these clippings. They would talk late into the night, trying to guess what had happened to their older sister. Another private investigator, Dan James, had been following the case since 1975. He became interested in the missing girls and began developing his own idea as to what might have happened to them. He announced there was a $25,000 reward for any lead that led to the arrest and conviction whoever was responsible for the 3 girls going missing. Oddly enough, James had never been hired to look for the missing trio. He said he wanted to find them, and that was that. Never receiving any money for his effort, he did say he received some death threats from an unknown source. According to James, several credible witnesses say they've seen Rachel since the disappearance. One was in 1998 around Christmas, he said. Today, the families are still trying to understand what happened that December day back in 1974, just 2 days before Christmas. Most think the girls are all dead, and they're just waiting for their bodies to turn up. Others are still waiting for the knock at the door, announcing the return of one or all of the missing girls. I'm going to take a brief pause here, play a couple commercials, and drink some coffee, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Makeup isn't something you want to just smear on and hope for the best. You might come out looking like Lon Chaney. Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and get a free makeover to see how makeup should be done. 956-723-3019. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Truck. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Tuesday, September 20th, 1988. Tara Calico left her home at about 9:30 a.m. to go on her daily bike ride along New Mexico State Road 47. She rode that route almost every morning and was sometimes accompanied by her mother, Patty Dole. However, Dole stopped riding with Calico after she thought she was being stalked by a motorist. She advised Tara to think about maybe carrying some mace, but Tara rejected the idea. I weigh 200 pounds. I know how to fight. I know how to make it hurt. I always carried mace when I went for a bike ride, just in case. On the morning of Calico's disappearance, she had told Dole to come and get her if she was not home by noon, as she had planned to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30. When her daughter didn't return, Dole went searching for her along Tara's usual bike route, but couldn't find her. Dole contacted the police. Pieces of Calico's Sony Walkman and a cassette tape were later discovered on the side of the road. Dole believed that Calico might have dropped them in an attempt to mark her trail. Several people say they saw Calico riding her bike, which had never been found. No one witnessed her being abducted or anyone trying to interfere with her ride. There were several witnesses who said they had observed a light-colored pickup truck, maybe a 1953 Ford, with a camper shell that was following closely behind her the day she vanished. The police began search of the area where the cassette player was found, but they turned up nothing that said whether Tara had been abducted or attacked or if she'd simply gotten lost. All of the usual places were checked: hospitals, hotels, and the morgue. Then things turned very strange. June 15th, 1989. A Polaroid photograph of an unidentified young woman and a boy, both gagged with black duct tape and tied with their hands behind their backs, was discovered in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. The woman who found the photo said that it was in a parking space where a white windowless Toyota cargo van had been parked when she pulled into the store parking lot. The woman said that the van was being driven by a man with a mustache who had looked to be about 30. The police set up roadblocks to intercept any vehicles resembling the white van, but the van nor the man were ever identified. According to the Polaroid company, the picture had to have been taken in May 1989 or later, because that particular film used in the photograph was not available until that year. A TV show, A Current Affair, showed the Polaroid during a July episode, asking if anyone recognized the people in it. Someone who knew Dole and her daughter watched the episode, and they called and they told the mother to contact the authorities. She looked at an enlargement of the image and became convinced it was Tara. See, Tara had a scar on her leg that was an exact match for the girl in the photo. The photo was examined by detectives at Scotland Yard, and they are convinced of its authenticity. Relatives of Michael Hanley, also of New Mexico, who had disappeared in April 1988, saw the episode and said they believed he was the boy in the photo. 20 years later, in 2009, pictures of a boy were sent to the Port St. Joe police chief, David Barnes. He received 2 letters postmarked June 10th and August 10th, 2009, from Albuquerque, New Mexico. One letter contained a photo, printed on copy paper, of a young boy with sandy brown hair. Someone had drawn a black band in ink over the boy's mouth on the photo, as if his mouth were covered in tape, just like the photo from 1989. The second letter contained an original image of the boy, minus the markings. August 12th, the Star newspaper in Port St. Joe received a third letter, also postmarked in Albuquerque, on August 10th, and depicting the same image of a boy with a black marker drawn over his mouth. The boy had not been confirmed to be the same one as in the previous photos. None of the letters contained a return address or a note indicating the child's identity. This led to the officials believing it may have something to do with the disappearance of Tara Calico. The letters were sent at the same time that a self-proclaimed psychic had called about Calico, saying she had met a runaway in California with whom she'd worked in a strip club. The girl, believed to be Calico, was eventually murdered. The caller said she had dreams suggesting the runaway may have been the missing girl and that she may have been buried somewhere in California. The searches did not lead to any discoveries. The photos were given to the FBI for further investigation in hopes of finding fingerprints or possibly some DNA evidence. Today, there have been no suspects arrested and no bodies found. The photos are still the only evidence Tara and Michael were kidnapped and held captive for nearly a year or more. The families still hold out hope that the two may someday come home. Have you seen me? You've seen the posters. Every grocery store, post office, and anywhere public information is posted, you'll see pictures of missing kids. Many have been age progressed to look like how they should look after years away from their families and friends. The very first child to be placed on a poster asking, "Have you seen me?" was Cherry Mahan. Cherry was 8 years old when she disappeared without a trace. Hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers searched the area where she was last seen, at the end of her driveway on Corn Platter Road in Winfield Township, Pennsylvania. This is the case that made national news several times. Police have had many leads that never seem to pan out. On February 22, 1985, Cherry Mahan went to school just like every other day. School let out, and the kids all boarded buses which would take them home. At 4:05 p.m., Cherry Mahan got off her bus along with 3 other students. 3 of the children walked to their homes and went in to be with their parents. Cherry was supposed to walk the short distance to her home at the end of the driveway, only 300 feet, the length of a football field away. She was seen getting off the bus by other students. The bus driver watched as the three exited, and then as they walked home, he drove away. Cherry's mom heard the sound of the bus as it stopped and then pulled away. She knew her daughter would be in just a few minutes. A few minutes became too many, so she walked to the front door to look to see if perhaps her daughter had stopped in the yard to play. There was no sign of the 8-year-old. She looked in every direction, trying to spot her child. Shortly thereafter, Cherry's father searched around the house and the surrounding area. With night coming on quickly, the Mahans called the police. It was getting cold outside, and an 8-year-old would be in bad straits trying to stay warm. Emergency crews and local residents began searching, extending the search area for many square miles. As more people showed up to help look, the situation became worse. An 8-year-old, if she should get confused and become lost, will stop and hide. This is what happens just about each and every time. I used to be trained as a search and rescue person, and this is what always happened with young children. The searchers looked in every possible location a small girl could get into. As the night grew darker and colder, the searchers became more worried. Where could Cherry be? The police began questioning the kids from the school bus to ask if they had seen anything. A few kids said there had been a van parked nearby as Cherry exited the bus. The van had a painting of a mountain with a skier on the side. As word spread about the van, everybody kept an eye out for any vans in the area. 1992, Cherry Mahan's family legally declared her deceased, and they donated the entire life insurance policy to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. If she is still alive, Cherry would be 42 years old today. She has brown hair and hazel eyes. There's a scar on her left arm from a dog bite. The family just wants to know what happened to her. Brian Schaefer was born February 25, 1979. After high school, he became a medical student at the Ohio State University. On the night of March 31, 2006, Schaefer went out with some friends to celebrate the beginning of spring break. Later, he was separated from them, and they assumed he had gone home. A security camera near the entrance to a bar recorded him briefly talking to two women just before 2 a.m. He then turns and re-enters the bar. Schaefer has not been seen nor heard from since. The Schaefer's disappearance has left investigators in a quandary because there is no other entrance or exit to the bar usable by the public. The Columbus police have several theories as to what might have happened. They are suspicious of one of Schaefer's friends who accompanied him to the bar that night but has refused to take a lie detector test. This may sound suspicious until you look at how often the lie detector has been wrong, and anyone who doubts the veracity of the test might be recorded as lying even when telling the truth due to psychological and physiological responses to the questions. On Friday, March 31st, classes at OSU ended for spring break. Brian and his father, Randy Schaefer, celebrated the occasion by going out for dinner together earlier that evening. The older man noted that his son seemed exhausted from having stayed up night after night on many occasions earlier in the week while trying to cram for his exams. He didn't think Brian should go out with friends that night, but boys will be boys, and Brian decided to go ahead anyway. At 9 p.m., Brian met with William Florence at the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a bar in the South Campus Gateway complex on High Street. An hour later, Brian called his girlfriend. She had returned to her home in Toledo to visit with her family before she and Brian were scheduled to depart for Miami. He and Florence then went bar hopping, visiting several other bars and nightclubs, working their way down to the Arena District. At each stop, the two had one shot each of hard liquor, according to Florence. After midnight, the two met Meredith Reed, a friend of Williams, in the Short North. She gave them a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloon where they had started the night. She joined them there for a last round of drinks. While the three were there, Brian wandered off, talking to others around them. Florence and Reed decided it was time to go, and they went looking for Brian. When the bar closed at 2 a.m., the two decided they would leave and see if they could find Brian outside. Once outside, they looked around trying to find him, but he wasn't there. After looking for him for a few minutes, they just assumed he had simply walked home. It wasn't that far, and the night wasn't too chilly. Perhaps he'd met someone and walked home with them, or he was just trying to clear his head from all that drinking. Wagner and Randy Schaefer both tried calling Brian later that weekend, but he didn't answer. On Monday morning, he missed his flight to Miami, and he and Wagner had scheduled long before. When no one could find him or anyone that knew where he was, Brian was reported as missing to the Columbus police. Police began their search at the Ugly Tuna. Since the area around the South Campus Gateway was considered a high-crime area, the bar had installed security cameras all around the building. The police reviewed the footage, which showed Brian, Florence, and Reed going up an escalator to the bar's main entrance at 1:15 in the morning. Brian was then seen outside the bar at about 1:55, talking briefly to two young women. He then re-entered the bar when the two women left. The camera did not record him ever leaving when the Ugly Tuna closed. A careful examination of the tape didn't show the student ever coming back out from the bar. The last time he was seen was at 1:55 going in. Now, Brian may have changed his clothes in the bar or put on a hat and kept his head down, hiding his face from the camera. But where would he have gotten the clothes to change into? He wasn't carrying any kind of a bag or a case that could have held his disguise. Nobody ever came forward looking for their missing hat either. The cameras might also have missed him had he waited for the right moment and then dashed out the door and hidden around the corner. There was no reason for Brian to try to avoid the camera. Having consumed quite a few alcoholic drinks, he would have been too inebriated to pull something like this off. He might have also left the building by the only other exit, the service door not used by the public. It opened onto a construction site that would have been difficult to walk through while sober and darn near impossible when drunk. Since Columbus has the most security cameras of any city in Ohio, more than Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo combined, officers next looked at footage from other bars to see if the cameras there could explain how Brian had left the Ugly Tuna. However, footage from the cameras at 3 other nearby bars showed no trace of Brian. The search began to fan out from the Ugly Tuna, with officers using police dogs. They looked closely at anything in the street where somebody might have been hiding. They inspected dumpsters and other waste containers. The police asked residents along the street if they had seen him. Flyers with Brian's picture were posted on every corner and ad board in the area. The police even sent units down into the sewer system to have a look there. Any tunnel or pipe big enough to enter was searched for any trace of Brian. A search of Brian's apartment on King Avenue, 6 blocks from the Ugly Tuna, gave no clues. His car was still parked outside, and nothing seemed amiss. After searching the surrounding bar area, the police began to work outwards, looking for any sign Brian may have either walked or been led in this direction. They searched miles away from the bar in every direction. The police did consider other possibilities besides an accident or foul play. Brian's mother had recently died. It was speculated he had gone away temporarily to grieve in solitude. This didn't really add up since he seemed to have gotten through the ordeal already. The authorities could not find a reason for him to voluntarily disappear. Those who had seen Brian or been with him that evening were asked to take a lie detector test. Reed and Randy Schaefer passed theirs, as did all the others. William Florence refused to take the test, suspecting the machine might say he was lying when, in fact, he was telling the truth. The 2 women Brian had last been seen talking to were later identified. They were questioned, but never asked to submit to an electronic device. Wagner called Brian's phone every evening before going to bed for a long time after the disappearance. Usually it went straight to voicemail, but one night in September it actually began to ring. She said, "I kept calling it to hear it purely because it was one of the best sounds I'd ever heard, even if no one picked up." She wrote on her MySpace page. The Singular, Brian's wireless provider, said that what Wagner heard may have been due to a computer glitch. His phone was not GPS enabled, so its location could not be determined. A ping from the phone was detected at a cell tower in Hilliard, 14 miles south or northwest of Columbus. The police received many tips, none of which resulted in any breakthrough in the case. At a Pearl Jam concert later that year in Cincinnati, lead singer Eddie Vedder took time between the songs to ask for tips in Brian's disappearance, but none of these were ever useful. Possible sightings in Michigan, Texas, and even Sweden were looked into. Randy Schaefer continued to search for his son on his own. A psychic he consulted said Brian's body was in the water near a bridge. Randy and Derek, Brian's brother, along with some other citizens who had become interested in the case, spent much of their free time along the shores of Olentangy River, which flows through Columbus adjacent to the OSU campus. They searched every spot where a body might be found. They looked under bridges, into culverts, and storm drains. They waded through the weeds and the brush along the river's banks. The investigation took a weird turn when it was suggested that Brian may have been the victim of the smiley face murderer. For those of you who haven't heard of him, the smiley face murderer would kill young men and dump their bodies into the water near a bridge. Then, on the face of the bridge, he would draw a smiley face. The smiley face murders came to the news when 2 retired New York City detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, found that a number of young men found dead in bodies of water across several Midwest American states over the last decade did not accidentally drown. Law enforcement had originally concluded these had all been either suicides or accidents. The two detectives believed these were victims of a serial killer or killers. The term smiley face became connected with the murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near the locations where they think the killers dumped the bodies in at least a dozen cases. Gannon and Duarte have examined evidence going back to late 1990 that they believe connect the deaths of 45 college-age males whose dead bodies were found in the water in 11 different states. These young men had all just left parties or bars where they had been drinking. The men, according to former detectives, often fit a profile of being popular, athletic, good students, and just about all of them were white. If this were true, Brian Schaefer would be the killer's only victim whose body had not been found. Columbus police eventually rejected any connection to the smiley-faced killer in Brian's case, even though there was a smiley face painted on the bridge near where Brian was last seen. In September of 2008, during a heavy windstorm in central Ohio, Randy Schaefer was out in the yard of his Baltimore home clearing debris. A branch blew off from a nearby tree and fatally struck him. Neighbors found his body the next morning. After Randy's obituary was run online, a condolence book was posted. One of the signatures in the book said, "To Dad, love Brian from the U.S. Virgin Islands." It looked as if Brian had left Columbus in order to start a new life elsewhere. When authorities looked into the message, it turned out to have been posted from Franklin County, somewhere near Columbus. They determined it was a hoax. Now, what kind of a lowlife would put such a thing out where friends and family would see it? So what happened to Brian? And what happened to all these other people who disappeared? Why did they disappear, and where are they now? Someone, somewhere knows where all these people are. Until either the bodies are found or the person comes forward, we may never know what happened to all of these missing folks. While preparing for this show, I read literally dozens of reports of similar cases. These are just the ones I decided to use for tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. If you don't enjoy it, don't say anything. You can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com, and you can find the archives at strangethings.podomatic.com. And be sure to make a note of the fact that July 29th, 2018, Ricardo Rodriguez and Thunder Rosa will be doing some sparring at the Dugout on 1303 Iturbide here in Laredo, Texas. Tickets are $5 at the door. Kids 7 and under are free. It's a family-friendly event, so bring the whole gang to watch and see what happens. Till next week, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.